everyone, and welcome back to the History Channel. I am Lissa and joining me today for our weekly Wednesday American history lesson is Robin Tasjan. With this expert over here, we will be covering the events that took place leading up to the ratification of the Constitution on June 21st, 1788. Hope you enjoy! So how did it all start? What was it like in the colonies before the Revolutionary War?
Side note, the Revolutionary War is also called the American Revolution and/or the American War of Independence.
Well, in 1607, an English trading company planted the first permanent English settlement in North America at Jamestown, operated under a royal charter. At the end of the next 150 years or so, England and Scotland had united into the Kingdom of Great Britain, and there were 13 striving colonies in North America. However, beginning in around 1760, both political and economic factors in Great Britain and the colonies led to the Revolutionary War.
Beginning in 1765, Great Britain passed acts that taxed the colonists, such as the Stamp Act and 2 years later, the Townshend Acts.
What were the acts?
The Stamp Act was when the British taxed all materials printed for commercial and legal use in the colonies, such as newspapers and pamphlets, and the Townshend Acts were taxes put on imported goods to the colonies. The British taxed because they were in debt from the French and Indian War. In both of these acts, the colonists rebelled against Great Britain because they were being taxed even though they didn't have representation in Parliament. The phrase taxation without representation was coined by the Sons of Liberty because of this.
Fun fact, the Sons of Liberty was a secret society of the American business leaders that formed in the American colonies in the summer of 1765 to oppose the Stamp Act.
Later, in January of 1768, 24 towns in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island agreed to boycott British goods. This sparked more riots, which eventually led to the Boston Massacre. Here is an engraving produced by Paul Revere depicting the Boston Massacre.
So when did the Boston Massacre take place and where?
Well, it occurred on March 4th, 1770, on King Street in Boston, Massachusetts, and it was a riot that began as a street brawl between the British soldiers and colonists, which quickly escalated into bloody slaughter. 3 years later, in December of 1773, an event now known as the Boston Tea Party occurred.
What was the Boston Tea Party?
Well, it was an incident in which 342 chests of tea belonging to the British East India Company were thrown from ships into the Boston harbor by American patriots disguised as Indians.
Why did it happen?
It happened because the British had taken down some taxes, but they had left up the tax on tea, and the colonists were still angry. A few months later, in the spring of 1774, the British Parliament passed the Coercive Acts to restore order in Massachusetts and to calm down the riots. Also, the Coercive Acts were passed to punish the Bostonians for the Tea Party. They included acts that closed Boston Port, restricted Massachusetts from forming its own government, guaranteed a fair trial for British officials, and forced the colonists to house soldiers and other British troops.
Fun fact, the Coercive Acts were called the Intolerable Acts by the American colonists. The British thought that the acts would help maintain control in America, but they had the opposite effect, causing many people to join the side of the people rebelling.
About a year after the Coercive Acts were passed, in April of 1775, an event took place now known as the Battles of Lexington and Concord.
What were the battles of Lexington and Concord?
They began when Thomas Gage, a British Army general officer, led a force of soldiers to Lexington. He planned to capture colonial leaders Sam Adams and John Hancock, and then go to Concord to seize their gunpowder. However, spies such as Paul Revere figured out their plan and told everyone to be ready for the British. Because of this, when the British got there, the people confronted them, which led to battle.
Fun fact, the colonists who were a part of the local independently formed militia were called the Minutemen because they were said to be able to get ready in a minute.
The battle kicked off the American Revolutionary War after tensions in the colonies had been building for many years.
What was the Revolutionary War?
It was the 1775 to 1783 armed rebellion in which 13 American colonies independent country founded with the Declaration of Independence in 1776.
We won the Revolutionary War, right?
Yes, we did.
What were some of the reasons why we won?
Well, there were four main reasons. First, the colonies had a home field advantage and knowledge of the terrain. Second, the colonies had a lot of motivation. They had nothing to lose, so they were going all out. They were willing to give up their life for the cause, and as Nathan Hale famously said before being hanged by the British, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." In addition to this, they had a lot of civilian support and volunteering.
Was there anything else?
Yes, there was also great leadership on the colonist side, and both France and Spain helped the colonies as well.
After the colonies won the war, what was the first thing they needed to do?
They needed to create a new system of government. The first system created was known as the Articles of Confederation, adopted on November 15, 1777, and ratified on March 1st, 1781.
Why don't we still use the Articles of Confederation today?
Well, some problems with it were that each state only got one vote, and Congress needed 9 of 13 states to pass any laws, meaning that basically nothing ever got done. However, besides this, Congress was actually very limited to what it could do. The government could declare war, conduct international affairs, and make treaties. It could coin money, but it could not raise taxes. And this was a problem because the colonies were in major debt from the Revolutionary War. Also, there was no executive branch to enforce any acts that Congress passed. And another major problem with the Articles was that there was no national court system, and even though almost every state had its own militia, the national government was unable to gather a combined military force. All of these issues and others like these led to the Constitutional Convention.
When did the Constitutional Convention take place and where?
It took place from May 14th to September 17th, 1787, and it was located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The point of the convention was to decide how America was going to be governed.
What were some of the things that stimulated the convention?
Things that led to the convention were severe economic troubles, that led to political rebellions such as Shays' Rebellion, which was an uprising in western Massachusetts to protest the taxes, as well as the demand for a stronger central government.
So what happened at the convention?
First, George Washington, a man trusted by the colonists, became the president of the convention, and after that, the framers began to think of ways to amend the Articles. However, eventually that idea was scrapped, and many people proposed new types of government.
We actually have interviews with James Madison, Roger Sherman, and William Patterson about their proposed constitutional plans.
Today, we are outside the Constitutional Convention, and we have James Madison here to talk about his proposal. Thank you for coming here today.
No problem. I'm excited to share my wisdom.
So, James, I know that you proposed the Virginia State Plan, also known as the Large State Plan. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, so actually the Virginia plan calls for a strong central government with 3 branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial. The hope was that the national government would remain close to ordinary people, even as it expanded its power. The Virginia plan was actually rejected by the convention by the opposition from delegates representing states with small populations.
Why exactly?
Because the proportional representation in the Virginia plan would mean that smaller states would have less say in the government than larger states.
Also, what is the reason why you don't think America should be a republic?
In republics, the great danger is that the majority not sufficiently respect the rights of minority.
James Madison really said that.
Thank you for your time.
No problem.
Here we are in the back of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Oh, look, there's William Patterson. What was your proposed plan for the new Constitution?
I believe we should adopt a system from the Virginia plan that I named the New Jersey plan.
What is the New Jersey Plan?
The New Jersey plan is the plan that allows equal representation for each state in a one-bodied legislature.
Why do you think this is the right form of government?
Because this way all the states are represented equally. Oh, I'm so sorry, I have to go.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. I have reports that Roger Sherman is in this building. Let's look down there. Hi, Roger Sherman. Could you tell us a little about your proposed constitutional plan?
My plan created a bicameral legislature with proportional representation in the House of Representatives and equal representation in the Senate. This was to make sure that there was not too much power in one area.
Wow, I know you proposed a great compromise, so what is it exactly?
Yes, I did propose the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise, and it defines the structure of Congress, a House of Representatives, and a Senate. So overall, we utilize both forms of representation, providing proportional representation in the House and equal representation in the Senate.
That is very interesting. It is time for me to head out, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, it's so cool how you actually got them on camera.
Fun fact, James Madison is called the father of the Constitution because of his key role in the document's drafting, as well as its ratification. And he also was responsible for taking notes throughout the convention.
In the end, the Great Compromise was chosen. This model of government relied upon a series of checks and balances based on the separation of powers between the legislative, judicial, and executive branches of government.
Side note, the legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch carries out laws, and the judicial branch evaluates laws.
During the convention, there were different key compromises. First, there was the Great Compromise that we already talked about that was proposed by Roger Sherman. Then there was the Three-Fifths Compromise, the Commerce Compromise, which allowed tariffs only on imports from foreign countries and not exports from the United States. Also, the Electoral College was decided on, and it was a group of people designated by the Constitution to elect the President and Vice President of the United States. Each of the 50 states is given presidential electors equal to the number of its representatives and senators.
In addition to this, there was something called proportional representation that had to be taken into account.
What is proportional representation?
Proportional representation is that the representation is based on population, and because of it, the slave-owning states wanted the slaves to be counted as part of their population, while non-slave-owning states said that slaves shouldn't be counted because they couldn't even vote. This issue was then solved with the Three-Fifths Compromise. This means that the total white population would be counted and 3/5 of the other population would be counted too. Also, the Constitution said that Congress would have the power to ban the slave trade, but not until after 1808.
Fun fact, the word slave was never used in the Constitution, even though it was implied many times.
Another thing apparent in the Constitution was the idea of federalism. Federalism is a system of government in which people are controlled by the national government as well as the state governments.
There were also many people who were anti-federalists, including George Mason and Patrick Henry. Also, many common people and farmers were anti-federalists too because they saw less need for a strong central government and they thought that smaller local governments would respond better to the people.
In the end, was there a process that a constitution had to go through before it went into effect?
Yes, the Constitution had to be approved by 9 out of the 13 states before it went into effect. In order to convince people to vote in favor of the Constitution, 3 of the constitutional framers, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, wrote the Federalist Papers.
What were the Federalist Papers?
They were a series of 85 essays written to persuade people to understand why a strong central government is necessary and how, in the end, it doesn't get in the way of people's freedoms.
I'm bagged! Out of the 85 essays in the Federalist paper, John Jay wrote 5, James Madison wrote 29, and Alexander Hamilton wrote 51 essays!
Ultimately, the papers did their job, and New Hampshire became the 9th state to accept the Constitution on June 21st, 1788. Also, Rhode Island didn't attend or sign the Constitution because they didn't believe in a stronger central government, and neither did a lot of prominent figures such as George Mason, who didn't sign out of protest. Also, Thomas Jefferson didn't sign because he was in France at the time, and John Adams was in Great Britain. Also, George Mason and James Madison were responsible for first proposing the Bill of Rights.
What is the Bill of Rights and why is it necessary?
The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. It guarantees civil rights and liberties to all people living in the United States, like freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. Federalists argued that the Constitution did not need a Bill of Rights because the people and the states kept any powers not given to the federal government. Anti-Federalists said that the Bill of Rights was necessary to protect individual liberties. The Bill of Rights was eventually approved or ratified on December 15, 1791. Throughout the next 230 years or so, our nation has grown and amended the Constitution 27 times to adapt to the people around it. Overall, the Constitution was really just a starting point for the U.S., and other things would be worked out in the years to come. Some people believe that we should take everything the Constitution says literally, while others think that the world was a very different place in the late 1700s than it is now. However, it is important to know about the Constitution because it is and will continue to be the supreme law of the land, and it impacts everyone living in America.